The Dr. Terri Show is presented by Evexias Health Solutions. Evexias Health Solutions is an emerging leader in the integrative medicine on a mission to positively impact people's lives through the transformation of healthcare. Evexias educates and trains practitioners on the new, innovative, integrative therapies that support a preventative care model that drives vitality as you age. You can learn more about Evexias Health Solutions and many of the healthcare topics we discuss on The Dr. Terri Show at Evexias.com. That's EVEXIAS.com, as well as find a provider near you. Now here's today's episode. Hey, welcome to the Dr. Terri Show. We are talking about anxiety and depression today, and why is it so prevalent in our society across the age spectrum, from young children now all the way up to older patients and older people, I should say. And what could be some of the root causes? You know, what could be some really easy things, tangible things to look at that could be causing the problem? Is it something I have to live with? Do I have to be on these medications all the time? We're going to have a big conversation about all of this today. So let's get in and start the conversation. Hey there, Dr. Terri here. So I'm gonna have a little bit, could be a little more somber of a conversation, but it's an important conversation to have. This conversation around depression and anxiety and a lot of kind of mental health issues that are pervasive, you know, in our society today across the age spectrum. We're seeing more and more anxiety and depression in young people, young children. Of course, in my world, in the hormone world, in my clinics, we deal with a lot of depression and anxiety in men and women who are transitioning through life changes, and they're, you know, some women as young as 30s after having children, definitely on into our 40s and 50s. And there is a hormone aspect to it all the way around. There's also a gut aspect to it that would be really important to have a conversation about. And then there's just what are we letting in kind of conversation to have. And it all plays a role. It all impacts our brain. So let me pull it back and let's just talk about the hormone piece, because it's a really important to understand the role that hormones play in the brain, especially testosterone and melatonin, DHEA as well. DHEA is an acronym for a long word that is a hormone that's secreted in the adrenal glands, and it balances out cortisol, right? Cortisol has its role. Cortisol is a really important hormone. It helps us in times of stress, fight or flight. It helps us when we get injured or we're acutely sick. You know, obviously it comes to the rescue and does some things with inflammation that we need, but chronically high cortisol levels wreak havoc in the body and wreaks havoc in the brain. When women and men and children and teens are in this constant fight or flight, right? Constant stimulation, it really raises cortisol levels, which plays just a huge role in every body system. When our cortisol levels are constantly high, it plays a role in our insulin levels, which plays a role in weight. So there's just so many aspects, you know, to this conversation. If we just take depression, anxiety as kind of the center of this wheel and all of these spokes that kind of spoke off of it, there's a lot of things to consider. But when we're talking about hormones, which, you know, women and men start to lose hormones in our third and fourth decades of life, especially testosterone. Testosterone plays a huge role in the brain, and there's literally thousands of receptors in the brain that are responsible for mood and thinking and mental clarity. So there's areas of our brain called the amygdala that turns on these centers or off if these receptors aren't stimulated or if there's other things going on in the body. So one of the number one symptoms of testosterone decline in women, especially women, but in men as well to a degree, is depression and anxiety. I can tell you story after story of patients, females primarily, coming into the office that just say, I just kind of have the blues, the blahs. I don't really understand what's wrong with me. I have a really happy, successful life. There's no reason for me to feel sad. And it's an internal struggle. There's a little shame around it as well, especially in some cultures, that I don't have a reason to feel this way, so let me shove it under the rug. We don't talk about it. In fact, there was one study that showed only about 10% of women will even bring this up to their healthcare providers or anyone else in their family. So there's been kind of a stigma around it for many, many decades. A little bit less, it's a little more conversational now, but still it's for certain generations and it's kind of tough to talk about, right? But when you understand there could be some key reasons for it that can be fixed, that this isn't how it is always has to be, that's really important to understand. So hormones are a big part of that. The other thing that happens typically when a lot of patients go into their healthcare provider with some of these complaints, one of the first things we're given is a medication for that, right? So antidepressants, anxiety medicines, sleep medicines, all of these things. And those are important tools. But you have to understand that those tools were only meant to be a stopgap solution, a Band-Aid, if you will, while you're figuring out what the root cause of the problem is and fixing the root cause of the problem. So most of these medications are just meant to kind of simmer down this fire just enough so you can get in there and kind of figure it out. Unfortunately, in this country, it's become the solution. And those solutions, which were never meant to be a solution long term, cause other problems, right? Side effects of these medications are vast. Energy, thinking, libido, weight, there's so many side effects of these medications. And the thing about it is they never fix the problem. I would venture to say we're not deficient in Prozac, right? It's not a molecule in our body that we get deficient in over time as we age, and so we need some more of that, right? It just doesn't work that way. We're not deficient in some of the anxiety medications, right? These are not molecules that our body makes. So if you are somebody that is on some of these medications, just understand it's okay. We need them. They're important. But there also should be a conversation around what's the problem here? Is there something I can get underneath to fix so I can gradually transition off these medications? And that's really important to understand. No matter where you are, and if this is a conversation that's near and dear to your heart, or you have family members that this resonates with you because you have loved ones that are struggling with these things, the number one thing I want you to hear me, if you are or anyone is on these kind of medications, don't abruptly stop them. Don't hear what I'm saying and go, I don't need these anymore, and throw them out flush them down the toilet. That can cause a lot of problems. So you really want to work very closely with your healthcare provider if this is something that you feel like you want to fix and gradually get off some of these medications. So I just want to throw that caveat out there. But do understand there could be some reasons that you can fix. Hormones are one of them. There's another really important conversation about the gut. There is what we call the gut-brain connection. 80% of serotonin is made in the gut, and serotonin is that happy hormone, serotonin, dopamine. These are all these really important neurotransmitters, these molecules in the brain that play a role in our moods, along with the other hormones, testosterone, DHEA, estrogen as well. And when you have what we call a leaky gut or gut problems, or you have too much bad bacteria growing in the gut, that can release all these other inflammatory molecules that impact those neurotransmitters in the brain and how they work. So one of the first things when we see patients in our office, and we train healthcare providers on, is if you have a patient that's complaining of depression, anxiety, let's look for the most obvious things first. Right? Is there a hormone deficiency, depending on their age, depending on their, if it's a female, has she had children, and where she's at in her reproductive journey, if you will. And are there some deficiencies that are so obvious we can just address those? Because the majority of patients that come through the office, there is a deficiency in some hormone, and that kind of fixes the problem. So start there. If you're looking for some answers, one of the first answers would be, let me get all my hormones checked. You kind of have to find somebody that understands how to do that and what to do with that information. So let's start with the obvious things. DHEA is another really important brain hormone that we now know has its own receptors in the brain that impact moods and depression. I had a patient a couple of years ago that came in, and depression was one of her main things, and she had been on a couple of different medications. She had a lot of hormone insufficiency. She was also had some gut issues, and she had insulin resistance. She was struggled with her weight. There was multifactorial, but we got her primary hormones optimized, but she still just had that last lingering little bit of depressive symptoms that she was really struggling with. And her DHEA was actually pretty low. And so we started her on a DHEA supplement, and the next time I saw her a month later, it was just night and day. So sometimes it's just little easy tweaks like this, and we were able to slowly transition her off her depression and anxiety medications that she had been put on that really weren't fixing the problem. So that's a perfect example. We see hundreds of these kinds of patients in our offices every day. And you may know somebody that is exactly fitting that description. Another really great story is of an 18-year-old boy, young man, actually, who his mom was a patient of mine. And she just saw so much improvement in her own self. This happens a lot. Adults will get well and they'll get some things fixed, and then they see these glaring issues in their children. And she wanted to have her son come in and be seen. And of course, started with the usual stuff. Let's just check out everything, check his hormones, all those things. Everything was perfect. He's 18. He had great hormone levels. He had some deficiencies in vitamin D and some B vitamins. He was probably not what we call a methylator, and that's a whole nother conversation, but there's a certain molecule that helps us metabolize B vitamins, and B vitamins are very important to the brain. And so just after having a conversation with him, we just did a couple of little adjustments in his diet, tried to get him off of some of that packaged processed stuff that was messing up his brain. That was a little more challenging for an 18-year-old. Sonic is awesome for them. But we put him on some vitamin D. His vitamin D was really low, and some methylated B vitamins, and some iodine, because iodine plays a big role in thyroid function. And the next time I saw him a month later, it was just profoundly different. He was off his anxiety meds. He was even off his ADD meds. I mean, this kid came to me on antidepressant, anxiety medication, and an ADD med, attention deficit disorder, right, which is basically a bunch of stimulants. He had transitioned off all of those things in the matter of about 4 to 6 weeks, and couldn't believe how much better he felt. And this mom, I tell this story a lot, but this mom, said, I could not get this kid to take a Flintstone vitamin when he was little, and now he's calling me from college going, Mom, I need more of those pills, because he felt so much better. So he's a great example of, somebody who had fuel in the tank, it just couldn't get into the engine to do the work. And it really completely changed his life. He was able to focus more in school. The story goes on and on. So there's understanding that there's some root causes that can be hormonal in nature. It can be nutrient deficient in nature, like that kid was. It can be, some gut issues. Like I said, there's a direct correlation. I talk about this if this is something that really resonates and you want to learn more about the gut-brain connection. I do a whole chapter about it in my book. But when you have what we call gut dysbiosis, or you have too much bad bacteria in the gut related to the good bacteria, it releases these molecules called lipopolysaccharides. I'm going to use big words. But those play a profoundly negative impact all over the body, but specifically in the brain, and also the cardiovascular system, the heart, everywhere really. But just making some minor adjustments in diet is really profound. And, another thing that is really kind of interesting that people don't really think about, we have this conversation quite a lot, is what stimulus are you letting in, right? What noise is there that's distracting you from what you really need to be focusing on, or that's putting thoughts in your brain that shouldn't be there? We see so much depression and anxiety in our young population now, teenagers, 20s. And it's unfortunately, our brains weren't designed to be constantly stimulated by technology. And so when we wake up and the first thing we do is open our phone, and it's constantly in our face all the way through the whole day. I mean, these kids are able to have their phones in school now. I mean, they're just bombarded with information constantly. And part of the problem is you've got this constant stimulation, but the other part of the problem is a lot of young people's brains aren't developed enough to even know what to do with all these different messages that are coming at us. So we see a huge correlation between depression and really electronic use, and it has more to do with the dopamine hits that happen when they go on social media and they see a like on their post and it's a dopamine hit. You get this. So there's this really cool analogy that a friend of mine was explaining about dopamine. Dopamine is the happy hormone in the brain. It's the hormone that's released when we see that person we really like, or something that just makes us really happy. For me, it's pushing the button on my coffee maker in the morning. That is a dopamine release, right? But what happens is every time you get a little bit of dopamine, it goes away really fast. It only lasts a few minutes, but then you need another hit of dopamine, and then it lasts even shorter time, and these spikes of dopamine get less and less. And that crash, it takes more to get there, and then the fall is harder. This is a big area that we're seeing is causing some major issues with depression in really everybody, but because everybody's on social media constantly, but primarily our young people, especially teenagers, 20s, where so much of their identity and their self-worth is coming from that thing, right? So, they make a post and they go back on, oh, I got a like. Oh, dopamine. Oh, I got another like. Dopamine. Oh, I got another. That's why I don't like to look at social media, because, you kind of get caught up in it. One of my friends called it the eternal time suck. You can just get in there and time just gets away from you. But it's chasing that dopamine, and those crashes are a big cause of that. So we've got hormone imbalances. We've got disruptors like lack of certain nutrients. Vitamin D is a powerful, it actually looks and acts like a hormone in the body, but low vitamin D levels are highly linked to depression as well. So some of these things are really easy to fix. We are massively vitamin D deficient in this country, globally really, and a lot of that is because we're indoors all the time. We're on computers. We're not really spending time outdoors. When I was a kid, on Saturday, my parents said, get out of the house. I don't want to see you till lunchtime, And so kids were out there playing. We didn't have sunscreen. We didn't have, we got vitamin D naturally, but now we're lathering on sunscreen, and we put these sun shirts on our kids and hats, and they've got about this much of their body showing and exposed. So the primary way you get vitamin D is from light stimulation, sun, right? So if you're not getting that, you have to supplement it. And vitamin D turns on a lot of the hormone receptors, and it plays a big role in hormone receptor activity. So I talked about all these hormone receptors in the brain that are responsible for mood and thinking and mental clarity and focus. And if your vitamin D is low, those receptors aren't turned on well. They don't latch on to that hormone very well. And vitamin D actually has its own receptors as well in some areas of the brain. So it could be as simple as that. It could be as simple as B vitamins that play a role in the brain. It could be as simple as making a few adjustments in your diet. There's major food sensitivities that are happening that cause depression. I mean, one of the first roads we go down with young people in depression, besides looking at their, vitamin status or their nutrient status, is do you have any food sensitivities? Because, I'm not saying allergies, that's a different conversation, but sensitivities because of a leaky gut. Leaky gut just means there's these tight junctions that are normally like this. They kind of have gaps in them, and food proteins that were never meant to get into the bloodstream kind of sneak their way in, and the body says, oh, this isn't supposed to be there, and the body mounts this immune response and sees it as foreign. So let's say the kid's favorite snack is a peanut butter sandwich, right? Well, now these protein molecules from peanuts get into the bloodstream, and lo and behold, now he's got a peanut allergy or sensitivity or something like that. I've seen things as little as harmless, I guess you should say, as eggs, bananas, things like that, kids be very sensitive to, and they're hyperactive, they're depressed, they have all these mental health issues. And just figuring those out and getting those foods out of their diet, fixes things, right? So there's a lot of hope for a lot of young people that they don't have to be, on a lifetime of medications that start when they're teenagers and even younger now. It's heartbreaking how many young 2, 3, 4-year-olds, are on all these medications. It just blows my mind. 2-year-olds aren't born with this stuff. Something's happened. And that brings me to my kind of next point is a lot of this stuff starts in the womb. So anxious moms oftentimes have anxious children. Why? It's called epigenetics. It all those chemicals and all those hormones and all those stress hormones are passed on to the infant and can cause a lot of issues like this. So always just kind of take a step back and let's think, what could be the root cause of my depression? Is it a hormone imbalance? Am I at a time in my life where I could have some hormone deficiencies? Let's start there. Could it be some nutrient deficiencies? Maybe vitamin D, maybe B vitamins. Maybe my thyroid is off. Psychiatrists have been using thyroid for depression for decades. I mean, thyroid was one of the first things, actually more than decades, many, many, many years. One of the first things that psychiatry looks at in depressed patients is thyroid. And how well is your thyroid functioning? Are you deficient in thyroid hormones? There's many of our studies about thyroid in the brain come from psychiatric journals. So it plays a huge role too. So now, the problem with having the thyroid conversation is so many clinicians don't really understand how to look at thyroid and treat thyroid. I have a whole chapter about that in my book also, and what to look for. We just kind of weren't trained right. It's not their fault. We just kind of weren't trained very well in this area. So thyroid's another important one to look at. Am I suboptimal in my thyroid? Do I have some gut issues? There's some signs that are pretty obvious that you have a leaky gut. Bloating after meals, gas, depression, ADD, eczema, joint pain, PCOS, hormone imbalances. There's a big list of symptoms for leaky gut. But one of the primary ones is just kind of not feeling great, after you eat. That's more obvious one. There's a lot of subtle ones. And some of the ones I've talked about just today, depression and anxiety, very subtle. ADD, very subtle. A lot of people don't think that things are going on up here start down here. Hippocrates was brilliant. He said it, all disease begins in the gut. And I really do believe that the more I learn about the gut. So could there be some leaky gut issues that you could address? And sometimes it's just a matter of, I had a patient just the other day. I'd been telling her for a while, you really need to get the sugar out of your diet. Sugar is it is the most inflammatory thing we put in our body every day. And there's an interesting Netflix series that a really amazing guy, I've heard him speak a gazillion times, Dr. Mark Hyman, and it's called Fed Up. And it's a really good one. You should watch it if you're interested in this. But he shows a study that was done on rats in this documentary, and these were cocaine-addicted rats. And those rats had an option to drink water out of one bottle that was laced with cocaine, and then there was another bottle that was sugar water. The majority of the rats, all but 2 or 3, went for the sugar water. Well, why is that? Sugar lights up and stimulates, remember dopamine, those same area of the brain that cocaine stimulates. And they showed this on MRIs of the rats. It was pretty interesting. So when you looked at an MRI of a rat that brain was stimulated with cocaine, and then another rat that's brain was stimulated with sugar, the exact same area of the brain was lighting up on the MRI. And so that really kind of speaks to the addictive nature of sugar. And sugar addiction starts pretty much right out of the womb. If you look at the number one ingredient in formula, I was talking about this earlier with some of the team, is high fructose corn syrup. So it's highly addictive and it's highly inflammatory. And oftentimes that is the culprit of the depression. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with patients. It's hard to get off sugar. But when they do, even for a week, they can't believe how much better they feel. Their brain works better, their depression's gone, their joint pain's gone. I mean, it's amazing. Another one is obviously processed foods. We're going to talk about food in a future episode and what's happening to the food in our country and how it's impacting this whole conversation with the gut and the brain and depression and hormone imbalances and all of that. That's a whole show in and of itself. So going back to the depression piece, is it hormonal? Could it be estrogen, testosterone, thyroid, DHEA? Is it a nutrient deficiency? Vitamin D, B vitamins? Is it something I'm eating every day? Something I'm drinking every day, or not drinking enough water, things like that. Do I have gut issues? Do I need to address some things? Now, most of us know the things that kind of make us feel sluggish and yucky after a meal. If you eat food, or food-like substances, I should say, and you kind of crash after a meal, that's a sign that your body's reacting to that. And that's probably something you should stay away from. For me, it's pizza. Love pizza. Pizza doesn't love me. If I eat pizza, I'm down. I just want to go to bed and I feel yucky. Well, that's a good sign that is something that is your body's not responding well to. So pay attention, because the body gives us a lot of clues and we mostly ignore them a lot. So is it a gut issue? Is it a food issue? But the biggest takeaway I want you to understand is, in many cases, this suffering from depression and anxiety is something that has a root cause, and when you can fix it, you can turn that around. You don't have to live with it, and there almost always is an answer. You just got to look for it. Thanks for tuning in.